Hey everyone, happy Monday. Thank you for joining me here on another episode of Johnny Vlogs, this one being recorded for June 11th, 2018. We have a really interesting topic to get into, kind of a side effect on the Lyle Stevik case, really an aspect that I hadn't thought about until one of you amazing viewers sent me an email on it. So we're going to get into that, but before we have to thank several new Patreon and a PayPal supporter. So let's go ahead and get that done. Vera Nall, Lynn Merschel, Robert Gonzalez, Gracie Lancaster, Christina DeMellis, Lori McLean, Catherine Davies, and Grace O'Connor, all brand new pledges on Patreon. Thank each and every one of you for helping to keep me here doing what I love doing. Outside of that, we also had Emmy Waz increase her pledge. Thank you so much, Emmy. Very much appreciate that. And in terms of PayPal, Melissa Blake, I think this might be the third payment that she has sent via PayPal. Very kind of you, Melissa. Thank you so much for helping to keep me here. You can also support by going to Patreon. There's always the address in the description box below, or if you want to use PayPal, you can PayPal it to John, John, at lordandarts.com. So I got a really interesting email from a viewer named Sandrine. Sandrine also has her own YouTube channel called Flora's Patch. If you want to check out some interesting art, you might want to head over there. But she raised a really interesting question. So let's go through the email here. I watched the update video and something disturbed me. You know, when something nags at the back of your mind and you can't quite tell what it is. I finally worked it out. It's about Lyle Stevik. Everyone keeps on referring to him as missing, but was he? He had chosen to leave and his family seemed to have been aware of it. I don't think he was missing. He chose to go, then he chose to die. He made it very clear he wanted to do so anonymously. He checked in at the hotel under a false name. The hotel was very far from home, so nobody would recognize him. He left nothing behind that could identify him. So that thing that disturbed me during the video is this. The people who took his DNA, entered it in a database, identified him, and reported to the family and the rest of the world, although thankfully without releasing his name, did they have the right to do so? Wasn't it disrespectful of his very clear last wishes? Was his right to stay anonymous in death less important than the right of his estranged family to know he had died? He did not give permission for his DNA to be taken, and he didn't give permission for it to be entered in a database. In fact, he wanted the very opposite. I understand the work this organization is doing is important for missing people, those who are truly missing, who were taken against their will or murdered, but in this case, I'm not sure. I don't have the answer to my own question, but I think it's worth thinking about. Absolutely, Sandrine. I totally agree with you. It is a really interesting aspect to this. She also notes that I didn't mention it in my video. I didn't go that way with it because I was kind of in the same boat as her. I don't have a very good position on it yet. Now, did I potentially reach out to an expert on this that might be able to give us some insight? We'll get there, but I want to share my thoughts with you guys on this first. It's very hard in working on this channel. I become very focused on who I consider the victims, and that's if it's a unsolved murder case, that's if it's a missing persons case, but the missing person victim for me isn't always the actual person that's missing. I also think of the family and kind of approach it from their perspective very strongly, which I think many of you respect in terms of me being appropriate with the topic and trying to be mindful of the family's point of view. But in this case, I think Sandrine is raising some very interesting questions. We know the story of Lyle. We know that he certainly did go there kind of hiding his identity. He didn't have, a driver's license or some type of identification with him when he was found. He wrote a little bit of a note. On that, he could have said who his family was if he really wanted them contacted. I think it raises an interesting question, but more about DNA, and is DNA really private? And I've really been racking my brain about this one as well. What interests me about that is DNA, yes, it's specific to me, but obviously includes kind of code from both of my parents. So is that code that I have within me uniquely mine? I mean, Obviously, it is uniquely mine in one way because there's no other person on this planet that, came out quite like me. So I understand it from that perspective. But then considering that everywhere I go, if I'm touching something, I'm leaving traces behind. If a hair falls out of my head, I'm leaving traces behind. If I use a water bottle and throw it in a trash can, I've left a trace behind. How private is that information? It's not the same as, my social security number or my driver's license, where it's a physical object. I know where it is. I can lock it down. If I want no risk to that information getting out, I know how to handle that. But in terms of DNA, it's a little different because we're literally leaving traces of that information all over the place. So then for me, it becomes a question of, is it the method of identification? Is it the point of, okay, DNA might not be private because you're leaving it all over the place, but the mechanism for tracing that DNA back to a person, is that where the privacy wall should kind of pop up and be in effect? And it is interesting here because you are talking about a website. You're talking about typically stipulations on genealogy websites are very clear that you should only be entering your own DNA or someone that you're the legal guardian for. I don't know if that's the specific case with GED Match, which is the website that I believe was used in this case as well. But in this kind of weird coincidence, just as I've been mulling over all of this, I was contacted by a name you guys might be familiar with, Colleen Fitzpatrick. And she is actually one of the people that worked on this case and helped crack it. You might remember from the video that I consider her a bit of a superhero. She's frequently coming up in cases where there are familial matches as being a tool for helping to crack those cases. And in most of those cases, we're talking about tracking down a murderer or identifying a truly missing person, kind of as Sandrine stated. But in this case, we still have that mystery question of, did he really want this information found, and is there privacy around that? So I put it to her. Here's basically what I asked her. In covering numerous missing person cases, I constantly hear that adults have the right to disappear. In Lyle's case in particular, where we had a young man that took steps where we could reasonably assume he wanted to remain anonymous, did you have any hesitation or internal conflict about using his DNA to identify him without his consent? Is DNA private information, or does his family have the right to that info once he's deceased, and considering that they have portions of that code within them as well? Colleen was very kind to respond. The question about privacy is interesting. My experience is that technology usually develops faster than our ability to answer ethical and legal questions about it. There will have to be more discussion in this area, eventually leading to policy decisions about how to handle such cases. In this regard, since I'm not an attorney, all I can offer is my own opinion. My understanding is that Lyle's remains are the legal responsibility of the Grays Harbor Medical Examiner's Office, and that they had the authority to okay our work on identifying him. I believe that taking a sample of Lyle's DNA for identification purposes is well within the law. I didn't hesitate to work on this case. Knowing what I know about the family who lost their son, we did the right thing. There is no way to communicate with Lyle. His opinions on this will never be known. It could be true that he wanted his family to find out and left misplaced clues that we have not come across. It could be that if he could understand the time and effort that was invested in identifying him and the concern that was expressed about him by people all around the world, he would regret what he did and approve of our work on his behalf. We could have a never-ending debate on what Lyle wanted, and it would go nowhere. However, we have talked to his family. We know how much they appreciate finding out what happened to their son. We know they can go forward and try to heal from this more than heartbreaking experience. Why side with the silent dead who have given up on life when there are living people out there who hurt just as we would if we had lost a loved one? Oh, really interesting considerations here. And unfortunately, we do hit this thing where whatever Lyle's intentions were at that time kind of get frozen and locked in because that is the end of his life. He's not changing his opinion from that point forward. But she's raising some interesting considerations. What if he would have realized what would have happened and that his picture would have been seen all over the media and all over the internet? Is that really what he would have wanted as well? I don't think so. So it's one of those things where talking about what he wanted at that time and talking about what him as a person would have wanted beyond that time is obviously, it's a debate that would literally lead nowhere. We can't really do that without him being here to let us know what his thoughts would be in that case. So do we just lock in where his perspective was at the end of his life and just kind of consider that like last rites or something along those lines? Perhaps. But I don't know that, I still don't know that at the end of this video that I have a conclusive answer. I still don't know that I am satisfied. I'm telling you guys, I've been thinking about this thing for weeks, and I just can't quite get it to a spot where I'm really comfortable. I do think that there's something to the mentality of, I mean, look at what happened with the East Area Rapist. I mean, we leave DNA all over the place. It's the mechanism of tying that back to the person's identity where I think the privacy layer comes up. And here, yes, they notified his family, but they did keep the family's name out of the press. They did keep privacy around all that. So in those regards, I think they did a pretty good job in terms of handling the privacy. It really comes down, I guess, to the question of, does his family have the right to know that he is no longer living? And once again, just being who I am and the type of work that I do, I consider who I look at as the victims in this, which are the people that are still living and still hurting from this. And in that, I kind of line up with what Colleen is saying here. You know, it's unfortunate that Lyle couldn't be a part of this conversation, couldn't have had a chance to change his mind, maybe about ending his life, but also about all these other things, maybe about doing that anonymously, maybe about running away from his family in the first place. That's one of the unfortunate things that I see in any case that I cover when we have a person in their 20s that hits the end of their life. But I don't know about this one, guys. I'm still rattling. It's kicking around in my brain. I'm not sure where to settle on it. That's why I wanted to talk to you about it, share this information that I've gotten so far. Big thank you to Colleen Fitzpatrick for answering my question there and giving us a little bit more to mull over. And of course, a big thank you to Sandrine for sending in just a really, really interesting question. I knew as soon as I saw this that I was going to have to do a Johnny Vlogs on it. What do you guys think? Let's talk about this in the comments below. I want to hear your perspectives. Am I right about where I'm making this DNA protection layer in terms of the identity, or do you guys think, nope, the actual DNA is private in itself? Let's talk about that. What were Lyle's intentions? Do they get frozen in time because of the fact that he is deceased? Do we have to respect those going forward, or can we make some reasonable assumptions about the possibility that maybe that's not exactly what he would have wanted if he'd still be here to see what has happened as a result of all this? I don't know. It's a really tough one. That's why I want to hear from you on it. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Johnny Vlogs. I appreciate each and every one of you out there. Hope you're having, how about just having a wonderful day this time? We'll save the havering for next week. Take care, everyone. I'll see you back here tomorrow on the Lord and Arts channel.